I thus address the world through the medium of the latest wonderful invention, so that my voice, like my great show, will reach future generations and be heard centuries after I have joined the great and, as I believe, happy majority.
Welcome to Becoming Barnum, the journey to fame and fortune, a podcast presented by the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and based on their award-winning blog series. Support for this project is presented to the Barnum Museum from the City of Bridgeport American Rescue Plan Act funds, People's United, a division of M&T Bank, and the Connecticut Humanities and National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the Federal American Rescue Plan Act. The Barnum Museum has a special treasure in its collection, a 750-page copybook of letters written by Phineas Taylor Barnum when he was traveling in Europe in the 1840s, introducing his young protege, General Tom Thumb, to high society and royalty, as well as millions of ordinary people. Barnum's lively letters to friends, family members, and business associates reveal him more completely as a person, at times struggling mightily to make the 3-year tour a success, all the while directing the management of his American Museum from afar. They also offer insights into Barnum as a husband, father, and nephew, and as a mentor to the child actor-entertainer whose popularity resulted in their meteoric rise to fame and fortune. In his mid-30s at the time, Barnum proved himself a tireless go-getter, calculating risk-taker, and astute entrepreneur decades before his name was attracting crowds to the greatest show on earth. These letters offer a window into the hardscrabble era of show business, revealing how Barnum went about acquiring, hiring, and commissioning attractions, and promoting his museum and the General Tom Thumb tour in Europe. Join us as we travel back in time to learn through Barnum's own words about the real person behind the legendary P.T. Barnum. They stared with all the eyes they had. Have you ever tried to envision a visit to Barnum's American Museum? I find it is a feat of the imagination to reconcile exterior pictures of the museum with the sheer quantity and variety of artifacts, animals, and activities offered within, supposedly over 600,000 items. And I am guessing that people in mid-19th century America who had not yet visited the museum in New York City felt much the same way when they read advertisements. It all sounds, well, unbelievable. Which, of course, was the draw. Inside the 5+ story building at the corner of Broadway and Ann Street, animals both living and stuffed were displayed, including enormous and exotic wild beasts. There was also an aquarium, a cosmorama filled with trompe-l'oeil scenes from around the world, a portrait gallery, more than 100 items of statuary, a gallery of life-sized wax figures of the famous and infamous, plus others arranged in tableau scenes, historical curiosities and natural oddities, scientific inventions, artifacts and weapons representing cultures in distant and remote places, wonders of nature such as giants, thin men, and little people, special events like poultry contests and dog shows, and a grand multi-story lecture hall where speakers, performers, and plays were presented. Not to mention there were musicians on the balconies, a garden on the rooftop along with a huge Drummond light, and banners and flags to catch people's attention. How on earth did all this and the visitors who flocked to see these things fit inside Barnum's museum? To tease our imaginations, let's return to a letter explored in our previous episode and pair it with a couple of rare guidebooks. The letter, dated September 11, 1845, is the one in which Barnum rather humorously expounded upon his ideas of how puffing and humbugging are best accomplished. But it continues with further instructions to C.D. Stewart, who had now recently returned to the city after touring with the Swiss bell ringers, who were English, not Swiss. Stewart, Barnum hoped, would now be turning his attention to assisting the American Museum manager, Fortis Hitchcock, and putting his writing skills to good use. Barnum urged Stewart,
"If you can remain at the museum, I want you, with Hitchcock's concurrence, to get up a catalog of the museum to sell to visitors. It should be of such a size as would cost us $40 to $50 per 1,000, and sell for only 6 cents each. The object being not to make money on the sale, but rather to have the price so low that many copies can be sold, and thus send into the country a good puff of the establishment. A good cut, woodcut or engraving, of the museum should be prepared and placed upon the cover, a cut that would show well, and perhaps a frontispiece should be prepared showing the museum park, Astor House fountain, etc. As things are continually changing in the museum, the catalog should announce that a new edition would be published every year, say about 1st November.
This instruction to Stewart reveals the start, in 1845, of Barnum's annual or occasional guidebook for visitors to his museum. At present, we know of only 6 such booklets that are still in existence, though there may be others in collections not publicized or hidden in archives amidst larger collections of family papers, an oddball item that someone just happened to save. As ephemera, that is, material never intended to be preserved, one naturally expects these slim, paper-covered guides to be rare, and they are. Here at the Barnum Museum and at the neighboring Bridgeport History Center in the Bridgeport Public Library, we are fortunate to each have one. The museum's is from 1849, the earliest surviving example we know of, while the History Center's booklet dates from 1850. A similar but different 1850 booklet, held by the Library of Congress, features a paper cover with a delightful portrait of a young Barnum. Its main purpose was to describe and illustrate the recent alterations and new decor of the museum, Barnum's $50,000 investment. A later guidebook, dating to the early 1860s, is owned by the University of Minnesota. It can be seen online through the Hathi Trust. The New York Historical Society also owns 2 undated booklets that are believed to date from the 1860s. There are links in the show notes to each booklet, except for the New York Historical Society booklets, which are not accessible online. To Stewart, Barnum presented his idea for the catalog's introduction, noting,
"The work should commence with laudatory remarks on the great benefits to be derived by young and old from visiting a museum of natural history and art."
He also specified specific language to include in the text.
"The American Museum contains much the largest and most valuable collection in America, and its proprietor, now in Europe, is making constant additions, his pride being to present to the public always the most varied and excellent entertainments for the established and moderate price of 25 cents.
In the 1849 booklet, a fictional storyline reinforces the idea that one could barely hope to see everything, for the 2 boys visiting with their Uncle Findout stared with all the eyes they had upon entering room number 1. They saw so much to look at that if their heads had been full of eyes, they would not have had eyes enough to see all that was there staring them in the face. With its tiny print and black and white illustrations, the 24-page booklet is quite different from today's museum guides. However, pictures do punctuate the text on many of the pages and show wild animals, displays of wax figures, strange artifacts, and famous performers such as the Quaker Giant and Giantess and General Tom Thumb. Interestingly, the text does not follow the plan that Barnum had laid out to Stewart.
"Have each article in the museum numbered, if the number is plainly written on a bit of colored paper, thus 168. It is better than to print them. Then let numbers in the catalog, of course, correspond, and give the name and country of the beast, bird, or article numbered, and wherever it will admit it, give a description of the habits and peculiarities of the article of thing being described. Thus, you will be furnishing information with the puff and making it slip down easy."
That said, Barnum acknowledged,
"These are only hints. You and Hitchcock think of them and then go ahead."
Possibly the first editions used his format. Then he tried the storyline idea in 1849 and returned to the catalog style the following year. The Bridgeport History Center's 1850 booklet reflects the format Barnum suggested. Although this is a much more substantial guide at 114 pages, rest assured it does not describe 600,000 items. The highest item number is 883. Each object or specimen is numbered and titled, and some are described. It appears that the lists follow the order in which one would view the items at the museum. Perhaps there was some logic to the sequence, but if so, it escapes me. A handful of portraits interspersed among dozens of stuffed birds? Following the artifact catalog, the museum's popular performers are described with a disclaimer that one should not expect to see all of them at the museum. Some had come and gone, of course. If you're curious about the interior, I'd certainly recommend this booklet for its illustrations of the various spaces within the museum, and for getting a better sense of what was displayed where, as the objects are listed according to the saloon, large hall, or gallery they were in. Just one more thing. The idea that these guidebooks would primarily serve as promotional material rather than as an additional source of income is quintessentially Barnum. If the thousands of booklets sold for a few cents and were brought home by the museum's visitors, who would likely show their souvenir to friends and family, booklet purchasers would essentially be paying to advertise the American Museum. To boot, word of mouth coupled with informative print material could more effectively attract people from rural and distant places than Barnum himself might reach through regular advertising. So our 1849 guidebook may be an example of Barnum's theory at work. Penned at the top of the cover is the name of the original owner, Abner G. Gould, the town where he lived, Westbrook, Maine, just outside of Portland, and a date, June 10, 1849, most likely the day of his memorable visit to the American Museum. Not only does this provide the obvious identification information, the fact of its being written there suggests that the owner valued the booklet enough to keep it from getting lost, which could have been while he was in the city, but also perhaps when he returned home and lent it to others to read. Who was Abner Gould? An ordinary young person from rural America, exactly the kind of person whom Barnum wanted to attract. Documents and census records tell us that in 1850 Abner was 19, living with 11-year-old Josiah Gould, presumably his brother, in the multi-generation household of the Joseph Broad family. They were farmers, the occupation Abner himself followed, eventually acquiring 20 acres of his own. He never married, and at age 33 he served in the Civil War. That his small, yellow-covered Sights and Wonders in New York booklet may have been passed around Westbrook and then survived for 171 years somehow seems all the more amazing. It's a modest bit of evidence that Barnum thoroughly understood his everyman clientele and was determined they should come and stare with all the eyes they had. A capital dodge for us.